The research I conducted was investigating the effects of intensity of man training on the rate of skill acquisition in a learner with autism spectrum disorder. When I refer to intensity of man training, I'm talking about the rate at which learning opportunities are presented to the learner. So a high intensity treatment, the learning opportunities are being presented in quick succession, whereas a low intensity treatment, the learning opportunities are being presented in a slower succession. People working in the field of applied behavior analysis will be familiar with the fact that one of the characterizing elements of autism spectrum disorder is language impairment. Previous research has found that language impairment increases the likelihood that a child will engage in maladaptive behaviors. There's other research that also shows that functional communication training can be helpful in reducing maladaptive behaviors. And for the parents and caretakers of children with autism, reducing behaviors such as aggression, elopement, and SIB are of high importance, which is which demonstrates the social validity of research into effective man training. The participant in this study is a 5-year-old male with autism spectrum disorder. The learner has echolalia, and as far as his echoic skills go, he can repeat a large amount of age-appropriate words with relatively clear articulation. There are some blends that he has a little bit of difficulty with, but overall the approximations are still pretty intelligible, even to someone that is not familiar with the learner. As far as functional communication goes, though, the learner can only tact a handful of preferred items and script. He can script a couple phrases from movies and shows that he likes and use them in somewhat appropriate context. Like if he is angry with his mom, he might script something that a character has said when they are angry, but he doesn't demonstrate an understanding of the words. Um, since he has been in clinic, he has received some man training and can use a handful of single word man, such as go, help, eat, and outside. But other than that, his functional communication skills are still pretty limited. He has no interverbal skills and very limited banding and tactic skills. There has been previous research that shows both the duration and intensity of behavioral services is positively correlated with better outcomes. So this research was hoping to further investigate these findings. This this study used an alternating treatment design because a multiple baseline would not have been appropriate because it is not one intervention being tested across participants, settings, or behaviors. And I didn't think an ABAC design would have been appropriate either because I was worried that there would be lingering effects between treatments 1 and 2. The independent variable for this study is the rate at which learning opportunities are presented to the participant. The dependent variable is the rate at which the learner acquires the skill of using the appropriate manner. Data collection was done by myself with the help of 3 RBTs using data collection software Central Reach. All these RBTs have been working for at least 6 months, but not much longer than that. So they are still relatively new RBTs, but they had previous experience with man training procedures similar to the ones used in this research, as well as data collection for man training. They also received formal training specifically on implementing this intervention. And for each of them, I was able to spend at least one session with them to ensure inter-observer agreement. The methods used in this research for high intensity man training was the learner was presented with a paint set that included a paintbrush, several colors of paint, and a sheet of paper. The learner was allowed to play with the paint set, operationally defined as physically manipulating the item in a way that was not part of aggression or property destruction. So the learner was allowed to play with the toy, and then the RBT would contrive learning opportunities by interrupting the play and allowing the learner to demand for the item back. And they they would present 10 opportunities within a 20-minute period of time at the beginning of the day when the learner arrived in clinic. For the low intensity treatment, it's a similar procedure, but the learner was presented with a bouncing yoga ball and was allowed to play with it, and the RBT would contrive learning opportunities for the learner to appropriately man for the ball. And the low intensity treatment presented the learner with 10 learning opportunities over a 5.5 to 6 hour period, depending on how long they were in the center. The teaching procedure for both the high intensity and low intensity treatments are the exact same, following a pretty standard man training procedure with a colored prompting. So the learner would be presented with the toy and then allowed to play with the toy for a little bit. The RBT would then interrupt the play by taking the toy away, and they would allow the learner 20 seconds to independently man for the toy back using the correct vocal command. If the learner did not respond, used an incorrect vocal command, or engaged in any maladaptive behavior, such as aggression, SIB, elopement, or item snatching, the trial was scored as an error, and the RBT would then use the prompting procedure in which they would use an echoic prompt, get the learner to echo the appropriate man. Then once the learner got the echoic correct, the RBT would represent the toy and allow the learner another 20 seconds to vocally man for the toy back. If at this point the learner correctly manded, they were given access to the toy and allowed to play with the toy again before the next trial started. If the learner did not get the man correct after the prompt baiting procedure, the RBT would start the prompting procedure over again until the learner got the man correct, and then move on to the next trial. The data from this research shows that in the beginning, at baseline, our learner did not have this skill at all, scoring 0% on all 3 probe trials for both the ball and the paint. And then if you look at the intervention, you will see that both the low intensity and high intensity interventions are positively associated with skill acquisition of their respective mans. But you will notice that the high intensity treatment is slightly quicker at teaching the mans. And then you will see some dips in the data here that coincide with breaks that happen over the weekend. So days that the learner is not in center, which is fairly typical that you see a dip here. But even then, you can see that the high intensity treatment maintains over the weekend break at a slightly better rate than the lower intensity treatment. Another detail is that in the last week of study, the high intensity treatment was approaching criterion with all 5 days being at 80%. If it was still at 80% the following week, we would have qualified that as criterion, whereas the low intensity treatment is not quite achieving criterion yet here at this point. Um, so this research supported the previous research that suggested higher intensity of services is positively correlated with rate of skill acquisition. I think this is useful to know from like a pragmatic perspective of if you are scheduling your day for your learner, you might only have so much time to run DTT sessions, and maybe you have a couple skills that it's appropriate to teach using DTT. I think it is smart for behavior analysts to know what would be the most effective use of their time. This study suggests that it would be more effective to use each of those DTT sessions to focus on a singular skill rather than have a couple skills that you spread out across each of the DTT sessions. One of the limitations of this study is that the learner does receive man training for other toys and activities while in center. So I feel like this could have possibly generalized to the skill of manding rather than just being about the specific mans, which I think would possibly be a confounding variable for the rate of acquisition you see for these mans. Another limit of this study is that we weren't able to conduct it for long enough to do follow-up to see how well the mans maintained for both treatments. And I think a good place to investigate further would be in at what point does the intensity of intervention have diminishing returns? So I imagine at a certain point, the response cost might affect how effective. At some point, I think the response cost might affect how much the intensity of the training helps improve the learner's goals.